Yo, what's up everybody? It is Drewberry, and it's that time of week again where we cover Marvel Snap news, all thanks to the Marvel Snap Bugle Twitter channel right here. Definitely go and follow them if you have a Twitter account. If you do not, and you only watch the YouTubes, I got you covered. These are going to be a bunch of developers' responses to community questions, some of those insights that you don't really get exposed to if you just follow, their big updates, right? You get a little bit of sneaky details to some of the cards, some balance changes, all that good stuff, and we're going to break it down right now. All right, so here's an interesting one about locations and their limitations and what Team Second Dinner is willing to do to change these up. And basically what this person is asking is, what are the boundaries? How far will you go when you create locations? For example, would you mess with cubes, taking cubes, giving cubes, anything like that? And Glenn goes ahead and says, I'd say it's a when, not an if, on locations messing with cubes. So it's coming. We just don't know exactly when. And mind you, they probably have a lot of locations already set up for the year, pretty much. It's just a matter of picking and choosing when you want to add them and then tweaking them as they go. So they also say we are open to modifying locations in the future if revisiting them will improve the game. But it's not something we're actively pursuing right now. I think that's pretty good too, right? What if some card comes out and it's totally broken with a certain couple of locations? Then you, I don't know, maybe instead of balancing the card, you change the locations, mix it up that way. Or you create a location rotation. I think that's one of the best ways to go about it. He also says in general, removing players' agency isn't something we're aiming to continue doing with new locations. I think he is definitely hinting at Krakoa. There was a lot of pushback on that one, so it seems like they don't want to add locations like that anymore, or at least for the summer or something along those lines, but they're going to come up. They want us to make strategic decisions with the locations, so I thought that was interesting. Quick note on Shuri, we're going to get a patch April 18th. Like, they've already confirmed there's a rework in the process. Like, if they had changed her in an OTA, it would have been a power or energy change, because they can do that in those OTA patches. So they kind of said, no, we got something bigger planned. It's going to be on the 18th. And that's kind of what Glenn here says when this person is kind of saying, do you still feel bad about Shuri and how she is right now in the meta? He also says, for what it's worth, Shuri's metrics are definitely healthier than the April 6th OTA shift, but she's still overall slightly stronger than we'd like. So I'm happy with where we landed for the next patch. Okay. So they already made this change well before that patch. So this has been in the works. They knew she was a problem. It's just a matter of time before launching. I didn't really mention this in any other previous content, but there was a series drop and it's happening on the 18th. So don't get ahead of yourself in opening up those reserves. You might want to save them or save that free card that you get for the 18th, because then you can choose one of these cards as your free card if you haven't already done so already. And then also in your reserves, if you open up one of these cards that is dropping, it's going to feel really bad when all you have to do is wait a few days. So I highly suggest waiting, hold on to your reserves for the 18th, and you can open a whole bunch and hopefully you get one of these cards. Okay, so this one got a lot of conversations going and it's a bit frustrating. Okay, so Pinky here says, has this been considered at all, releasing cards in bunches instead of the way it is with, one a week, the drip format, you know what I'm saying? So I think the hype would be way higher with a bigger injection. Right now it's just like, oh, less than 10% of players are playing with the new card. Guess we're playing the same deck still. And that's really, really true. I think it would be really cool to let the players pick one card from the 4 to 5 month to have for that month. Then with the battle pass, that's a pretty big shakeup, lots of new decks. So giving a card, if that's what they're hinting at, is way too much, right? But the answer Glenn gives is kind of brutal. So we prefer ensuring there's constantly something new to look forward to in our release structure. That is really difficult and kind of dodges the fact of what Picky is getting at. He's saying that, yeah, the new stuff is cool, but nobody has access to it until months later. That's the problem. There's no hype built around it. There is nothing to look forward to because you can't really for 2 months time. And then that shiny new thing is kind of wore off. Because one thing I've experienced is that the series drops are more important. The series drops, the cards go down in series, and that's when you have access to those new cards. So this rotation ends up being new card comes out, can't access it, no chance, too expensive, whatever, right? Maybe I saved up tokens for one of them, whatever. And then as time progresses, it drops in series and I finally have access to it. But by that point, any theory crafting, any fun, new card hype is gone. Maybe a lot of people have the card already. A lot of YouTubers, whatever, whoever bought it, like wailing out like crazy, already figured out the fun stuff to do with that. So then you can just kind of catch up. That's what it feels like. And I'd like to see them shake it up. I still think that there's work to be done in the new card release schedule. Willem here, who is also a Berry Knight, shout out Willem, says, what's the requirement for a card to be a permanent Series 5? That's a pretty good question because we've only had a few, and it's not so much the character. It does depend on the character, but like Null was a kind of a big bad. I think a lot of people were kind of surprised he didn't end up making the list. And Glenn goes ahead and says, other than the base prerequisite of being exciting, no, there's no requirements, just the card being exciting. I kind of hate that answer. Like, I don't mean to be picking at Glenn here, but the problem I have with that is, shouldn't all cards be exciting? Like, how are we tiering more exciting cards away from others and making them less accessible for most people? Let's make the most fun card possible and allow it for the least amount of people. Like, that just feels rough to me. And honestly, that gives me vibes that High Evolutionary, probably one of the more exciting cards to come to Marvel Snap in the last few months, is going to be a big bad. It's going to be expensive. It's going to be difficult to acquire. And I think that is, again, playing on the pain point of the new card release system and how it has to change. And you know what? Maybe the system is okay. I'm not saying one way or the other on how to fix it, but I do think that if we had more access, more availability to tokens to really truly guarantee one of these new cards a month, because right now you might, it's a maybe, you might accumulate enough tokens to get one card a month if you play every single day, completing all those daily quests. So if we could just get a few more tokens, then maybe, just maybe, it could work out. Okay, this is a very long post, but it's a pretty important one. I think that a lot of people can resonate with, and that is about Galactus being a bit of a frustrating card to play against. It's not necessarily OP, it's not overly strong. There's a lot of counters, and if you shut down a Galactus deck, you probably walk away with cubes. Like, there's a good shot of it. But when you get destroyed by one, when you're not running Cosmo, when you can't get something over there, you feel helpless. It just feels like no matter what you brought to the table, it just doesn't work. And that can be frustrating for a lot of people. And Glenn goes ahead and says, Galactus decks shouldn't be one of our strongest or one of our most popular because the gameplay is polarizing both emotionally and mechanically. If these decks do exceed our desired ranges, which are lower than our typical range for balance action, we'll make some kind of adjustment. That is really great to hear. I'm excited about that, honestly, because I agree that Galactus decks shouldn't be that popular. I think right now they are. Bearing the fact that it is a Series 5 big bad card, I think a lot of people have pretty good access to that card at this point, since it's been since December since it was released. So I feel like we're actually seeing a little bit too much Galactus, or too much potential Galactus decks than we'd like. But how do you nerf the card? Like, that's a difficult one to nerf. They reduced its power, and that ended up being a buff essentially. So what do? Do you change the ability? That's a total rework. I don't think you do that. So you nerf everything around it. I don't know. That's a tricky one for the balance team. Let me tell you. Yo, check out this one from Charlene at Team Second Dinner. This Scourge here is asking about changing the variant shop. Maybe, make it so that you could pin stuff, or just, picking the ones that you want on certain cards that you want, that kind of thing. I think a lot of people would prefer a more optimized shop rather than the random rolls that we get every day, right? I don't think it's a huge deal, but it'd be nice. Charlene goes ahead and says, we actively discuss what we can do with our shop to improve the experience. One step we're taking content-wise is that we are developing a shop personalization feature to improve the experience with our daily offer shop. This way, we'll be able to offer a more customized selection of variants that cater uniquely to each player. Dude, let's go. I think that's so sick. If I use X card way more than another card, show me variants for that bad boy. I want to deck it out. I want to make it look like the way I want it to look. Do you have a card in your collection where you use it all the time, but you just don't have a good variant? So you're rocking the base variant all the time, and you're just like, dang, I wish I could just see something that looks sweet in the shop. For me, it's Null. I've had the base null for so long, and I think there's so many great null variants, but I haven't seen in my shop. Like, geez, come on, send it. Here's another bit of a long one, but I thought it was pretty neat. It's about the design philosophy behind Darkhawk. So this user asks, why wasn't it made a 5/3 similar to Dino and Ronin? But actually, one thing that they definitely are missing here is that those cards underwent a lot of changes before they ended at that stat line. And if anything, you could almost say like Ronin could use a buff, perhaps. So I don't know. Like Dino is still a fantastic card, but Darkhawk is very good, and it did get nerfed from 4/1 to 4/0. And was that all that worth it? I don't know. It did change a little bit. That card was running rampant in like January, December. So anyways, Glenn goes ahead and says, I was hired after Darkhawk's release, but led his balance. So I can only speak to that element. These cards do count different things. And the cards and locations that increase those things also vary a bit. While similar, the three cards in question aren't strictly comparable. Totally agree. I think a lot of people like to go apples to apples on some cards when really all it takes is a small change in the text. Like if it just does one different thing, if it costs one different energy, if it has a slightly different power, it's a different card. And it's going to impact the game differently. There's only, 12 cards in your deck. There's only 6 turns. Every bit counts. As for the specifics of the nerf, we debated which way to go on Darkhawk. +1 costs, plus power, negative power. The tiebreakers for me were twofold. First, Dino is strong, and matching Dino makes them both less novel, and their decks seem less novel. The second was that overlapping Darkhawk and Rockslide was a shell any of our potential Zabu nerfs would support. While Zabu was nerfed before Darkhawk, that was an OTA change, and Darkhawk was a patch. So we actually finalized the latter a fair bit earlier. So that's interesting. They had actually changed Darkhawk before Zabu, but it was just the way the patches rolled out. But yeah, there you go. A little bit of philosophy into the balance changes for that card. King Tonga here says, on a number of occasions, you have justified cards like Leech citing a desire to prevent big final turns. All right, that's a big topic, dude. A lot of people want to delete Leech, but what would happen? Leech was not in the game. So anyways, that's not really the question that's being asked here, but it's just about the explosive final turns. How do you feel about it? So Glenn goes ahead and says, there's a big difference between turn 6 being the most important turn, fun, and turn 6 being the only important turn, not fun. Seeing what your opponent is doing and deducing which locations they're fighting for or trying to kick you into fighting for is one of the most enjoyable parts of Snap. We love decks that explode on turn 6 existing, but we also want to ensure there are plenty of equally strong decks that don't. 100% agree. Like if the game was decided on turn 6, that would just blow, right? It's just like 5 turns of wasting my life. And retreating, snapping, all these things exist to build up to that final moment, but you need the build, you need the climb, you need to get there, right? And then turn 6, it is the most important, I would say, in most games that make it there, but it's not the sole reason you win or lose a game. Sometimes I'm literally playing the games and I'm like, I could have passed on turn 6 and won the game because of what my opponent did was just so silly, or they blew it, or a weird interaction, or something like that, right? So anyways, it begs the question about Leech. I wanted to make a video about Leech. I don't even know if I will end up doing it, just about like what would happen, what would Snap look like if he was removed from the game. There's been a lot of opinions of people saying that Leech is a necessary card for the health of the game, that it keeps those decks in check. I just can't bring myself to believe that because I feel like I only ever see Leech in those decks that look to cheat out cards. And it's good because it cheats it out and whatever, but you're not putting that in your deck to stop, those bursty decks. Like, I don't think you even care if it's a bursty deck or not. You just want to leech their hand because that's good value inherently. I don't think it's ever added for that sole reason in mind. And I think there's a lot of other cards in Marvel Snap that can do that. You got Killmonger to destroy all the 1-drops, Sandman to slow things down, that kind of thing. You know what I'm saying? So I don't feel like it would actually be all that bad if Leech were to just disappear or something like that. But hey, we're gonna find out. We're gonna see if they actually pull the trigger on Leech April 18th. Gotta admit though, since the Thanos changes, have you seen Leech as much? Has he been as much of a problem? I don't really feel like it has been, but it's still really unfun to play against. Here's a really good response, I think, in terms of like buffing cards and just making every card viable. I think a lot of people can get frustrated when some of the cards, maybe they're even getting variants for, are just not seen ever. They just feel totally weak, a total waste in the collection. So this person is saying, I know every card can't be perfect, and cards like Medusa, Punisher, and Quicksilver are crucial for the new players to understand the game and plays in pool 1 and 2, but after you reach some good pool 3 cards, these cards are useless. And we're doing the snap lock right now, and you can kind of tell like those cards are kind of good, but I feel like as you get closer and higher in the ranks, they drop off. You see them later. You don't need them. Glenn goes ahead and says, we want every card to have a purpose in the game. That doesn't mean every card's purpose will include being viable in competitive play. I think that's great. You have to have cards that are not necessarily viable in competitive play and are just fun to play, because then there's alternative decks. It's not always just like this perfect list. And there's so many cards in the game that can't all fit. Now, the thing is that I have with this are just all the old cards going to be, these kind of not viable to be in competitive play, not very good, not really that purposeful except for helping new players? Because what about all the new cards that are added? They're going to cost 6,000 tokens. They're going to cost an arm and a leg. Like, are they just not going to be viable? And that's going to be the release of the week. I'll get it in a few months and I'll be disappointed even when I open it up. I guess that has to happen when you have a system like this. That's what happens. All right, and the last one here today is by Quilava Trainer, who is also a Berry Knight. Let's go. So with the new experimental balance cadence, which is now after the April 18th patch, they're going to have one OTA patch every Thursday, and then following that, there's going to be one big patch every month. So a lot of balance changes. Are there any worries that this will put pressure on competitive experiences? While a stable metagame can easily tip into a stale one, does the team see a value in offering stability for a competitive scene? Just fishing for the team's current thoughts on the matter. Great question. Undoubtedly, I would love to see more competitive Snap, like actually organized tournaments, maybe even held by Team Second Dinner themselves. I think that explodes the game and it just makes it so much more exciting to tune in. I would love to cast. I would love to do all these kinds of things for Marvel Snap. I think it'd be really fun. But if you have balance changes coming out every Thursday, what happens for the people that have to submit decks on like Wednesday and then the tournament's on Saturday, or it's like a week-long tournament or something like that, and all of a sudden there's balance changes and the deck I brought to the table is absolute garbage because they just nerfed the most important card? It is tricky. You'd have to have like different balance states, right, of game that these tournaments can use if they want to go that route. I don't know. It's crazy. So I thought this was a great question, despite the downvotes. But Glenn goes ahead and says, we think the most interesting competitive metagames are always slightly in flux. With less solved deck lists and matchups are more opportunities to experiment. I kind of hate this answer because it dodges the real matter of the question. Like, yeah, okay, what you said is fantastic for the general player base and people out there just playing the game, not paying attention to competitive or anything like that. Totally fine. But what about those tournaments, dude? What about when it actually gets a little bit serious and money's on the line and then like these balance changes slice things up? It's not going to work. It's going to be a problem. At some point or another, it will be a problem. But for people who just casually play the game, enjoy the game, myself just streaming and just having content to talk about with balance changes, it's fantastic and I'm here for it. I love the balance changes. It's going to keep the game very, very fresh. I just worry about the competitive scene if it ever does spawn. We see tournaments right now. Snapdog Fan is doing some, so definitely check those out. Anyways, guys, that is going to be your weekly Bugle, some of the updates from the devs this week. I'm sure we're going to have loads to talk about next week because there's a huge patch on the 18th. So definitely snap subscribe. I'm going to keep you guys updated and covered on that patch. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time.